Welcome to the Weaver Sews. I'm Daryl Lancaster. One of my go-to seam finishes for controlling ravelly edges of a hand-woven cloth is a very filmy knit tricot fabric. It is sheer, it's flexible, and it's very lightweight. One of the things important to me in sewing with hand-woven fabric is that I maintain as much of the original seam allowance as possible. This filmy knit does the job. Years ago, there was a product on the market called Seams Great. It was a sheer bias cut, more about that in a minute, nylon tricot knit sold on a roll in 2 widths. You can still find the 5/8 inch width packaged by Dritz in big chain fabric stores, but I honestly never found that width helpful for any purpose. I prefer the 1 1/4 inch width, which is 3.1 centimeters. It was an amazing seam finish for protecting cut edges on any garment, especially one that is hand woven. Since this product is no longer available in 1 1/4 inch width, that I've ever found, I simply found a source for 15 Denier Nylon Tricot, and I cut my own. There are a number of sources of 15 Denier Tricot online. One source calls it nylon chiffon, and of course I sell convenient 1-yard packages in my web shop in some key neutral colors. In case you were wondering, nylon is a synthetic protein and can easily be dyed with acid dyes or just a bottle of RIT dye from the grocery store. First, you'll have to cut the tricot into bias strips. I've covered how to cut bias in a separate video. The link will be in the show notes below. But I've set up a 1/2 yard piece of folded tricot here, and I'll finish cutting. Hello. Move on through there. Thank you. And I will finish cutting the 1 1/4 inch strips. I'm cutting these strips on the bias, but I want to explain that this is actually a knit surface. It flexes best on the diagonal from the linear knit construction. But knits don't have a bias the way we think of in a woven garment, where bias is the 45-degree bisection of the right angle of the warp and weft interlacement. I folded this 1/2 yard of knit tricot, so I'll be cutting on a 45-degree angle from the linear knit construction. Like woven bias, the edge, once cut, doesn't ravel, which makes it great for a lightweight edge protection. Once you have the strips of tricot, pick one up and observe that when you give it a slight tug, it curls in one direction. That curl will wrap over the edge of a piece of fabric and create a tidy, flexible, protected edge. Let's look at a number of garments that use tricot as a seam and edge finish. I wouldn't use this finish on an unlined jacket. A Hong Kong seam finish would be more appropriate there, but for any garments that need protection for the edges of seams, this is perfect. This hand-woven dress from hand-dyed yarns features a facing inside that is trimmed with the bias tricot. And the hem is also finished with tricot. And this hand-woven top also has a commercial fabric for the facing, trimmed with the bias tricot. And inside, you'll see that not only is the hem trimmed with the tricot, but so are the cut edges of the fabric where the side seam is sewn. I especially like this seam finish for tops, dresses, and tunics. It can also act as a base for a crocheted finish edge, like this top. Here you can see the tricot used to stabilize the edges and the seams. It is beautifully lightweight, flexible, and has no visible appearance on the outside. Here I've used the bias tricot to stabilize the cut lower edge of the garment, and I used it as a base for a crocheted edge. This is a stitch called a crab stitch. It is a single crochet but done backwards. So instead of moving in a right to left direction, I'm moving with the hook in the left to right direction, which creates this really lovely wrapped edge with the metallic yarns. And that is done over the bias tricot. First, let me say right up front that it is important to remember that nylon can melt if the iron is set too high. It's common to press a seam that is finished off with the nylon tricot, and when you lift the iron, the tricot has evaporated. It's all over the bottom of the iron. This is not a good feeling. Usually this only happens to you once or twice, and then you'll remember which iron setting on your iron will give you the best results. Keep the iron set on the lowest setting possible where you still get steam, and it should be okay. And a press cloth can help. I'll demonstrate first on a straight edge of a commercial fabric. This edge is cut off grain, so you can see how that works. Start by determining the curl. See the curl there? And placing the back side of the tricot down on the throat plate of the machine. I've got a little board under here so you can actually see the contrast, because white on white, I'm sure the camera's not picking up. You're going to take your fabric and you're going to place it, I have the fabric right side up. I'm going to place it on the tricot so that more is visible underneath. That way, when you fold the tricot over to stitch, you'll be catching in the back. So let me line that up into the machine here and show you how this works. I'm using a contrasting piece of tricot, and I'm also using a contrasting thread. Although typically if this was an actual real garment, I would have the closest match of the tricot and the thread. So here I'm going to begin stitching. You can use a straight stitch or a zigzag. If you're new with this, I sort of recommend a zigzag because you have a better chance of catching all edges. You'll see here that I'm just folding over the tricot just a couple of inches before the presser foot and then stitching up to that point. So all I'm doing here is I'm folding over and I am stitching to catch up. Folding over and stitching to catch up. Folding over and stitching to catch up. Now, if you were to run out of a strip of tricot, you can very easily begin continue by just adding in a new piece and overlapping. There's no need to do a traditional bias join. This stuff is so sheer and does not ravel, and just overlap and keep going. And you'll see that the tricot easily begins to bend if there's a curve. On the back side, once the tricot is applied, merely trim away the excess. Now, it should be noted that the wrong side and the right side look the same. So this seam finish could actually be applied to the wrong side, trimmed on the right side. So if you needed to stitch with the fabric upside down for purposes of grain line or, whatever reason, this actual seam finish can work on both sides. I have a scrap of hand-woven fabric here, and I will apply a strip of tricot to that edge. Be sure that when you fold the tricot over, you get a nice tight connection to the cut edge. You can see how sheer and flexible this is, maintaining the full width of the seam allowance of the hand-woven fabric. Once this is sewn, you can see that there is absolutely flex and no restriction on that seam allowance at all. So again, this strip is applied before the seam is sewn while the fabric is still flat. Creating a shirt tail hem in a hand-woven garment can be a challenge. Typically, fine shirting and cotton fabric shirt tail hems are twice folded and stitched. Okay. In a hand-woven fabric, it isn't realistic to turn the hem twice. There will be a lot of bulk and probably distortion. By finishing the edge with tricot, you'll reduce the bulk, but you can also use the tricot strips to gather the rounded corners to make them lay flatter. We'll start by applying the tricot in the standard manner, folding over the edge well ahead of the curve. Here's the curve. When you get to the curved part, begin by drawing up the tricot and forcing the curve into that slightly stretched tricot. Don't forget to try to keep the folded edge of the tricot against the cut edge of the fabric. Once past the curve, you can resume folding the tricot in the normal way. Once the fabric is removed from the machine, you can see the upward curl of the finished edge. This will press easily into a smooth, flat shirt tail hem. Don't forget that nylon tricot can melt with too hot of an iron, so I heavily recommend the use of a press cloth and a low setting, just enough to give you steam. My 700 and 1700 tunic patterns use bias cut nylon tricot as a seam finish, since both styles have a curved shirttail hem. I've also used this for an inside curve in a neckline, like my 900 bias top. To do this, stay stitch first, 3/8 of an inch from the cut edge. And you're going to stitch in the direction of the grain. That's very important. There's an entire video on this that I've already recorded. So, to remind you, in a curved neckline, you would be starting at the shoulder and you would be stitching with the grain towards the center front or back, and then from the opposite shoulder to the center front or back. Clip the seam allowance to release, clipping all the way to the stitching. Spread the curve open until it's flat, and then apply the tricot as if it's a straight edge. This will give extra ease in the fold of the tricot binding when the neckline seam allowance is turned towards the inside, and then the folded edge can spread, matching the curve of the neckline. You want to be sure that you catch all those little clips. Now you'll say, oh, that looks like it's stretched out, but when you press it towards the inside, you have the additional spread that you need for that lower edge. The tricot can be top stitched down as shown here in this hem. Or it can be stitched down by hand. If you catch the folded edge of the binding to the front of the garment, you will most likely get a ridge on the outside. Consider a blind catch stitch instead behind the binding. This topic has been covered extensively in a separate video on this channel. A couple of years back, I created a series of videos for Threads Insider. It's a video subscription service for readers of Threads magazine. They have all kinds of videos available from many well-known sewing educators, and I can honestly say there's some great stuff in those videos. I recorded 9 videos during the couple of days that I spent at the Taunton Press facility. One of the videos I created also talks about using bias tricot as a seam finish, and you might want to check out that episode. In addition, I created a video for Threads Basics, which is specifically on stay stitching. And that video is actually free to watch, and I highly recommend it. And both of those videos, the information will be in the show notes below. So there is a wealth of information to be had on all kinds of tips and techniques for garment sewing. I'm Daryl Lancaster for The Weaver Sews.